Alright, so I'm going to be doing a manual swap on my 1991 MTech 2. It's one of 29, and most of them came automatic. I'm going to be doing this with all factory parts. For the most part, some slight upgrades that I will point out throughout the build. But here we go. So step one, put on the crappiest clothes you can find. You're going to get dirty. You're probably going to get scratched. Get some gloves. Okay, so step two, jack up the car. I'm using 4 jack stands. I placed them right about here. It does ding up the coating underneath. And then the back one I put on top of the subframe bolt over on both sides. That seems to be most secure for me. And then step 3 is remove the exhaust. So I started doing that. Remove the exhaust. I usually throw the nuts back on here. It's kind of hard to see. Here we go. I throw the nuts back on. I often whack my head on that bracket as I'm coming back and forth through here, and this helps take less skin off. And then you remove mid-rear support bushing, and then there's one up on the transmission. There is an issue when you do a manual swap where the exhaust hanger in the front is not going to fit, so you have to weld on the tab for the manual. It is something I'll tackle in the future. You can roll for a while without it. After you remove the exhaust, I recommend coming over here and disconnecting the battery. You are going to be touching the starter in this, and that is always hot, so you must disconnect the battery. I recommend disconnecting both just in case. And then grabbing the exhaust studs from the front here. It is tricky and sometimes takes 2 people to get the whole exhaust out because it does not want to fit out through this section. You can cross that bridge when you get there. Down here, we're going to be swapping out the sway bar on the car, but that also does give us more room. So if I take the sway bar out, it gives me more distance from the firewall to the front of the car so that I can get these guys out. They stick out quite a bit forward to back, and it's really painful. I also recommend spraying these. I just put these on recently because I redid the head, but I highly recommend spraying them with some PB Buster a few days, and then the day before, and then the day of, just to get them to not stick. They are copper nuts usually, and they do become pretty seized on there. Okay, so now that the exhaust is out, I use the jack because I can drop the exhaust by about 1 inch, then drop it on the front, then drop it all the way in the back, and the front will basically just fall out of the car. But I'm always surprised how long this is. It just doesn't feel like it should be this long. Anyways, I'm gonna go throw this in the backyard for now. All right, so we're at the point where we're starting to disconnect more stuff underneath the car. Disconnect the hydraulic lines that run up to the radiator. Disconnect the dipstick here. There's a 13mm bolt that holds it to the back of the transmission. You have to access through the back here, and it's absolutely the worst. But what I was trying to get at is, after you take down this crossbar here, this sits over the top of that metal cover that covers the transmission. There's going to be 3 bolts that hold the cross member that holds the transmission. Right here, you can see 3 of them. 1 on this side, 2 on this side. These need to get moved to the front position up here. So if you see that the slot is not continuous. So this is for the manual transmission, this is for the automatic transmission, because the automatic's a little longer. That's why when people are doing e36 transmission swaps, they'll end up using a short, like an automatic transmission drive shaft, because the transmission is longer. On the normal e30 with the G260, it's a very short, small transmission, so it actually stops basically here, so you can see how many inches more the drive shaft has to be. To get the drive shaft out, while the handbrake is pulled and everything's still all connected tight, you can crack 2 of those nuts on the input shaft to the differential. Then you can rotate it by hand by releasing the handbrake, and then lock it back up, and then you can do the other 2. They are quite tight. They are usually 17s. I have occasionally seen 16s in that spot. It's pretty weird, but I think that's only like an aftermarket nut. The factory nut is 17, and that's where we are, just dripping. Now that the drive shaft is out, we can start removing some of the extra linkages. So this is the linkage that goes up to the shift lever inside the car. Simple C-clip, pop that free, it comes loose. Similar kind of weird version of a C-clip on the front of that, you're gonna need to pop that loose, otherwise you have this like 2-foot bar that's just hanging out in the middle of nowhere. Farther up, I've removed the front cover that goes over the front flywheel housing-ish area. And then I'm going to start popping free the, oh man, it is really, really hard to see. Up here, I need to break free this one, which is one of the lines that goes up to the top of the radiator. And then there is a nut up there. I don't know if I can see it. It's going to be a flashlight and a lot of prayer. And on the other side, there's literally nothing over here. On the manual transmission, you'll notice that there is a reverse light. That reverse light is actually up inside the lever, inside the car. And so you end up taking that wire, splitting it apart, and then putting the connector in to run the wire to the transmission. So don't be looking for that wire down here. Okay, so I found it. It's way up there. You can kind of see where my shadow is crossing the head of the bolt. I have to take that off to get the dipstick out. Otherwise the transmission gets stuck trying to pull it out. If I didn't say this before, make sure your hood is open for this. I had a mistake happen where the engine tilts backwards here, and this will ram up into the hood and cause a dent in the hood right here. So if you ever see somebody with a weird dent sticking out here, most likely they've dropped the transmission with the engine still attached, with the hood closed, and it just pokes up through. The other thing you're gonna have to disconnect is the kick down. This goes down to the transmission, and basically when you hit the bottom of the gas pedal, there's a little stopper, and when you punch through that, that will actually activate this wire, and it causes the transmission to kick down into a lower gear more quickly. Quickly is a very loose term for this transmission. It is a real piece of junk. All right, so at this point, transmission's about to come out, but I'd like to get ready for dinner and not be completely dirty, so it's time to move to the clean portion. I have a full leather console due to this car being an MTech 2, and then I have the MTech 2 steering wheel. So for me, it's taking off a 22mm nut here, or removing the airbag, or non-airbag. If you have an airbag, there's some weird screws on the back here you have to take out. I think they're Torx, like 4mm, 3.5mm, something small. Then you pop that airbag off. Then you can get into the nut here. Once this nut is off, you need to make sure that the key of the car is unlocked, and then it will come straight off like that. Set that aside. Be very careful not to break off the tab on the bottom of the steering wheel when you take it off. Now for the center console, you just basically rip this part out of the little piece that's here. Then there's 2 screws that take that off. Then you're going to come here, and this is a 10mm plastic nut. Sometimes it's a 9. I forget which cars are 9, which ones are 10. And in the back here, you'll pull this off, this ashtray that no one ever uses as an ashtray, thank goodness. And then you'll remove this as well. This will pull back, and then you'll be able to get to the center console. I'll talk about that in a second. All right, we're now at the knee portion that we're gonna have to remove here. So do not, or when you remove these screws, make sure you save them, label them. They tend to be very specific. They are not quite a machine screw. They're not quite a like metal screw. They're kind of odd. Save them, mark them. They're really hard to replace and find, and they look different than most other screws. Now for underneath here, I have seen every type of screw under here. I've seen 8s, 10s of hexes, and I've seen black, like you see on this car, because this car is all original, and I've also seen coated, like this one, these shiny color ones, all the time. So get under here, you're gonna remove these. This piece will fall down. Then you're gonna remove this part, and it's gonna just slide and fall right off. Set these aside. I recommend cleaning them up when you got a chance now. Then we'll get to the pedal box. All right, now that the knee portion has been removed, you can see the type of screw that comes out. This is the factory screw that comes out of this portion of the knee bolster. The lower portion has this screw for anybody really wanting to document and figure out the right screw. It looks like this. It has a little washer. It's kind of built into it, and it is about the width of a thumb. Now we're going to remove the foot kick panel. We just remove these two. One of these is the door chime. I normally just unplug that, and then there's the other chime. I forget what that's for. I think that might be for the clock, but I'm drawing a blank on that one. Looks like somebody put an alarm in this car at one point, so I'm gonna have to figure out how to get that out of there. We're to the knee bolster, like main support for only airbag cars. It has two 10mm on this side. You just pull the trim out here, and that, just set that to the side. Make sure you don't close the door on it because it will pinch it. Pull these two, and then these two, and this thing will just fall away. I have retrofitted a older car to have the knee bolster portion of this, because you actually do need this, because this is what it screws into in the bottom. If you do ever want to put a modern or the airbag knee bolster portion in, the only problem I found is that this portion of the steering column is a lot shorter on the airbag cars. On the non-airbag cars, it sticks down about another ½ inch, and so I had to hammer and like cut this piece up really bad to make it fit. But it does make a really nice upgrade for an early car with the paper one that always kind of gets destroyed. So this car came with alarm at some point. I'm gonna have to remove this. I do really like these older Alpines. I did retrofit one of these into my last car with the clicker so I could unlock my car, and that makes it really nice because e30 locks tend to be pretty crappy on the outside, especially when it's cold. So I'm going to end up clipping all this out. You can see they've really gotten in here, so this is going to be a few extra hours of work. But I do like seeing these old Alpines because the clicker is just such a timepiece that you're like, wow, that is of its time. And I really do like how simple they are. So this is a good place to use your phone. So you can see that there's a screw right up here, and then there's also going to be a screw right up here. I recommend using your phones to help you locate a shorty or stubby screwdriver like this, Phillips, to pop those out. I've also seen them be like 8mm. They're very similar to like this type of thread. They're kind of an odd, I don't know if it's going to focus. They look similar to that. I'm going to take that apart, and then the center console. Normally on these cars, there is some plastic flatheads that go right back here. Mine is missing that, so I'm gonna have to go to the junk drawer and see if I've got any spares, because that will flop around, and eventually this foam will break. Okay, so I pulled the nut off of here, pulled the two screws out of here. There, save them. You'll never ever find another one exactly the same, and you'll be cursing yourself because the thread on them is ever so slightly different than all the other threads. Getting them out was a pain. Getting them in is 1,000 times harder. At this point, I usually get a flathead and I start popping the light switch or the window switches and the breaker free. And this is going to be a bit of a chore. And then the console will just pull straight out. All right, so now at this point, I'm going to be removing the plastic pieces here. Just take the screws out, and then there's a one right here on the bottom. This just falls right down. What we're ending up trying to do is that this pedal box comes all the way up to underneath this column right here. And it only does that on the airbag cars. If you've got a early car, you don't have to take all this apart, and it's quite a bit easier. On these cars, if you really want to put the airbag bracket in that has the little spot for the spring to return the clutch, it is a pain in the butt. If you want to skip it and have no spring return, it makes you wear the clutch a little harder, but it is about 4 hours less work. Hardest part. Do you see these screws right here? So there is a screw, and what happens is when they install it from the factory, it breaks and tears off the head. So to get this out, I have to grind a slot with a Dremel into it. It's hell. I really hate doing this job. because it does throw sparks everywhere. It makes a huge mess. But you have to basically cut that one, and then the one that's on this side, which is even harder because the stupid bracket's in the way. I don't know if there's an easier way. I am contemplating just taking my Sawzall and just Sawzalling between plastic here, because you don't technically need that plastic. Or I've got another washer I can throw in place. But basically we're trying to get to the pedal box, which goes from back here on the firewall, comes all the way up, and then mounts up underneath into here. It's really ugly. That's why a lot of people will either like tack weld on right here the spot for the clutch return, or I think I did that on one of my swaps. Or what you do is just leave it off. As you see, it even has the provisions for the clutch. All right, now that dinner is over, it's time to get back to work. So pop the transmission bolts out. There's 4 of them on the back. I completely forgot that there's also 2 that go through. And this is the part that gets really tricky if you're doing it by yourself. You've got to have an extension that's, oh gosh, 3 feet long to get out to the back, and then you've still got to manage to grab onto the 17 here. So I'm going to try to do it by myself and not get squished. All right, so we're to the point of the night where the automatic, of course, came crashing down. It's now over back in the corner where it belongs, and should never go back in an e30. And so what I'm going to need is an impact gun stronger than, I only have the small DeWalt's, these little guys, and they are not strong enough to pop the bolts out. So I'm going to run to Harbor Freight and grab their cheap air ratchet or air impact, and then I'll be able to take those out. Other than that, a bearing goes back in. One thing to remember is on a manual car, there's a pilot bearing that sits inside of here. Don't forget to put that back in. I did do that once, and I had to take the transmission back out. That was not fun. Other than that, we just have to pull this guy out and then do the pedal box, and we're almost there. Putting the transmission in is actually not that bad on these cars because the transmission is so light. End of day 1. Okay, so I've just gotten the transmission cleaned up. Pretty good, not amazing. Like you can see, there's a little bit of grime still stuck in there. I'm gonna try to finish that off with a little bit of brake clean. So I tried for the first time today Purple Power Extreme. It's okay. It is not nearly as good as this alcohol-based gunk engine degreaser. This took off the really thick stuff really fast. I unfortunately did run, as you can see, run through the whole can. So if you're gonna do this job, I'd recommend at least 3 cans of this. Because you can still see there's just little bits of stuff in here that I'm going to end up taking off. I bought some Scotch-Brite at Harbor Freight, and you can see how gunked up it is. It's done a great job. And then I have an electric pressure washer, a pretty high power one made by Giraffe Tools, one of these guys, and that has done the major portion of the heavy lifting of how clean you can see the final finishes here. That's just like a discoloration in the casting, but it is quite clean. The pressure washer is 2,000-ish to 2,200 psi, so it's a decently powerful electric pressure washer. The other thing I'm going to be doing while I'm out here is going to be replacing this seal, replacing this seal. This one is really hard to get out. Many people just clean this up and pound the new seal over the top of that seal. For this guy here, I just ended up buying a new one. These ones are crappy. It's still coming in the mail, so I'll get that on in, I think, tomorrow. Other than that, I'm going to wire wheel up a lot of the surfaces. Like this is the slave mating surface. This clutch slave right here, I did buy new. Don't try to reuse the old ones. They tend to pop out and blow up. And lastly, I'm going to touch up with that brake clean a little bit more of this stuff. All right, I know we're jumping all around the place, but carrying on with the now clean transmission, we're going to take out the prop shaft, the output portion of the transmission. So we're at the point of putting the prop shaft seal back in. To get this out, I use a ratchet strap on the ears, prop here, stick it right through, and then I have purchased in the past the BMW socket for this. It's a deep socket that's thin wall. As you can see, this is pretty thin. That shatters if you put it under an impact gun. So don't buy that. Go to something similar to equivalent to like a Harbor Freight, buy the cheapest one of these you can get, and then just cut it down with an angle grinder. Take off a little bit, a couple millimeters, you might be able to see there. And then that will fit down inside here. And then you just impact the nut off. The nut is very similar, and I just made this mistake. This is a wheel bearing nut. This is the nut for the output shaft of the transmission. This is 22 millimeters. This is 22 millimeter or 20 millimeter thread. I made that mistake. Now I'm going to be waiting a few days for BMW to get me another one of those. The other thing is you're going to use this locking key when you reinstall this nut into here. This is actually what holds the nut from backing out. So what you do is you hammer in with a hammer and a screwdriver and just notch in on that spot once this is all back and installed. Pretty simple, but if you don't have the right tool, this tool costs maybe like $10 or less, and it's like over $200 from BMW the last time I checked. Maybe they've come down in price, but I'm not paying that kind of money, especially when they break very easily. Then once that's out, you clean up this guy. This is where the sealing surface is, right here. Kind of, man, it's not focusing well, but it's right there. Anyways, you get a brand new seal. Make sure you get the right seal for this. I know it's very similar to like the crank seal, but it is actually a different seal. I put a little bit of red grease right here inside of here, and I'll smooth that out and clean that up. And then you install that upwards here. Don't install this upside down. I know that the other side of the transmission one gets installed weirdly. This one gets installed this way. And you install this back in, drop it in. Then you put the nut on. And then next portion is to replace the seal here. Some people just pound that seal back in. I'm going to try to dig it out today and then replace that seal. At this point, it was too hard to put the transmission back in the car by myself and video it. So you're gonna have to deal with some photos I took here. What I ended up doing is replacing the starter. It's a great time to replace the starter because it's already out of the transmission and it's just a few extra wires. My starter was going out. So if you do have some extra bucks, get a replacement starter, toss it in at this point because it's not an extra work to get it out of the transmission. Next, I installed the flywheel. You can see that it's kind of scuffed up looking. That's because I used a die grinder and like a Scotch-Brite brush on there to clean it up. I checked its flatness with a straight edge. It's flat enough so I didn't need to go take it to machine shop and get it resurfaced. And so just a dry grinder to give a little more tooth to the surface. And then you install it with an air impact gun in this case, and a bunch of Loctite on the bolts. Make sure you always Loctite those bolts in. And then you can also see that the pilot bearing has been installed. Up the transmission through the rear carrier onto the transmission. That ends up making it a lot easier to install it when you're doing it by yourself, because now you just have the bolts hanging down from the chassis and you throw a couple nuts on there as you've thrown the transmission in, and then you don't have to try to one hand hold the transmission and then put bolts into the block through the transmission. I also put the transmission on that roller dolly so that I could slide it in as I was underneath the car. Harbor Freight, of course, as you do during this project, and found this tiny air ratchet. It was perfect for installing the flywheel bolts up to tight, and then I hit them up with the impact wrench, and then I also used it for installing the pressure plate bolts here because they are very low torque. I of course used a torque wrench to get them tight at the end, but this made it a lot easier just to get them in, and it's only about 10 foot-pounds of force. Next, I'd like to point out that I am using the centering tool for the clutch. If you do not use this, it ends up being very difficult to get the transmission installed past the clutch splines and then into the pilot bearing. On one of the other vehicles I did a clutch on, I didn't have this tool, and I had to take the transmission in and out 3 times to get that perfectly aligned. So definitely borrow or do something to make sure you get the clutch center. Transmission went in quite easily. I threw the 2 nuts on the back, and then I was able to start installing the bolts into the block. I do want to point out here that
I had forgotten to put in the cover plate that goes between the flywheel and the block, so I had to take the transmission back out. It wasn't the end of the world, but really annoying to have to do that. Make sure you put the flex plate or cover plate on the front before you get to this point. But also at the back here, you can see that carrier that is hanging that's kind of rusty. That is for the exhaust. Manual transmission exhaust has a different flange on it, and you'll have to have a welder weld you on a new flange and cut off the old one.
Then I removed that stupid alarm system or whatever it was, immobilizer, I'm not quite sure. Now we're moving on to fixing the issues. So what had happened is they spliced into the ignition power and then the green and purple wire down here to run the alarm system thing that they had going on. So to make this easier, these you just pinch in from the back and it will pull straight down from the column. After that, if you look on Rev, you'll see how to unplug. So this wire is normally plugged into this black where this orange clip is, this black wire here. So this is here, you pull this out, and this black and yellow wire is connected to this black wire from factory. So what you do is you just plug that into where you've removed let's see, now it's now locked in tight. But yeah, you unplug those and you'll see that they go down to this relay that hangs out like right under here. And what you're trying to do is remove this. This is the starter interrupt, so that if you're not in park in an automatic, that the car won't start. A lot of people try to splice these wires over here. When you do that, it causes this relay to still work. What happens is your cruise control won't work. And so on my very first swap, I didn't know that because back in 08, there was very little internet knowledge about this. So what I had done is put in a little toggle switch on my first MTech 2 that toggled these on and off so you could use cruise control and then start. What a pain in the butt. This is a lot easier. Thank you, internet, for all of that. But basically, yeah, you unplug that, and then dangling in here, you will see this wire, and it should have a jumper on it, this little guy here. This is plugged into here. This is the clutch. Basically, when you step on the clutch in a manual car, it isn't a clutch safety switch like on a lot of Volkswagens where you got to step on the clutch to start the car. What this is a clutch disengage for the cruise control only. So what you'll do is you'll end up plugging this into the cruise control sensor that's basically the exact same type of sensor as your brake light sensor, and it will sit right here once I get done with that. But now I'm just fully disconnecting this guy out of the car, and once that's out, I mean, you can leave it hanging. I was going to try to remove it if I can. I know that it can be kind of a pain because I think one of the wires might run over there. We'll figure that out when we get there. Okay, the Sawzall was the worst idea ever. I damaged my dash. So I called my mechanic friend, and he said, Eric, why aren't you using a chisel? So you just basically take a chisel, you line it up on here, and then just hammer away, and the bolt will come right out. It would have taken me about 10 minutes to do this whole job versus hours. So learn from my mistakes. Don't chew up your dash like I did with the Sawzall, because I was trying to cut through basically the bolt right here. So I'm gonna end up just backing the bolt out slowly with a chisel and a hammer. Okay, so now that came out in a few seconds versus forever trying to cut it out, man, I wish I'd called him sooner. It's very simple. You take these 13mm bolts out here, there's another set of them here and here, and then there's 4 along the back, and then you disconnect all of these connections that go through the firewall. So this is going to be the brake, oh no, sorry, this is the gas pedal line, and then you need to disconnect the clevis right here for the brake pedal, and it just pulls right out. Quite simple. Hopefully I got that in nice and clearly there. I finished removing that bolt, and then I've installed the new pedal box. So now I finally have manual pedals in here. This is really simple. You basically, it's hard to see with all what's going on here, but we've got the springs. You just remove all the springs, remove the pin, pull the pin out of the clevis. There's just a simple keeper on this side. It's like a C-clip, but you know, box shape. It's kind of weird. And then I also had to remove this guy off the back wall. You can kind of see where it goes back there. And then yeah, reinstall the pedal box, put all the bolts back in, bolt this back up, and halfway there. You can see how damaged I really did up my dash there. So I'll use a little bit of black RTB and not even notice once I'm done. All right, so now we got the exhaust back in. Very simple. You saw how to take it out. It's quite simple putting it back in. A little bit of a challenge. Sometimes it takes 2 people, but anyways, it's back in. So now we've got an automatic exhaust in a manual car. This is the situation where the old automatic is a lot longer, as I mentioned earlier, and bolts up to here. You can see that the manual's spot is right here. So what you have to do is have somebody weld on prongs right here so you can put a bolt through. I'm gonna run it like this for a while. It's not the end of the world, but it's definitely something that I will do before driving the car very hard, because it is going to tear up bushing back there, and that is going to get torn up over time. So getting this attached will help with that, and it will keep the bellows up here from breaking over time. But the other thing to point out is I had forgotten that late model and early models have different transmission plugs. So the plug I got is very hard to see up here, but it is the early model plug, and that's the kind where it's got the little spring-loaded clip to it. The late model are these types of where they just plug into a flat spade coming out of it. So I'll take care of that later. The car, it's been a minute. It's been a couple weeks because I had to order parts. I made a major mistake. I cracked this portion of the key, the ignition switch, and it shorted out and sent high voltage through the ground wires. So a bunch of these wires are all melted. I'm busy taping them up now. I had to buy a brand new switch and plug, and what had happened is it also melted out the back side of the plug in here, and so I had to end up wiring a bunch of, I purchased brown wire and wired that into the harness so that I have ground again. That is a huge mistake, but be very careful not to break this. They're pretty brittle at this point in time. But yeah, steering column's back in. Now we're I got my new BMW boot. The gasket that goes between here that keeps this, basically smells out of the car and the heat. And then this is a Z3M coupe shift knob, and I like the way it feels. It's not for everyone. It's very short, but I do enjoy that short feel on the shift. And that is about it. We're gonna slap it all back together and send it. Well, it's getting to be about that time. Looking pretty close to finished here. Just a few little tiny things to touch up. I lost some parts. They're floating underneath some of the seats. Yeah, there we go. Engine's all back together. Got my new brake booster valve here. The new starter is in here. Nice and tight. Double checked all those connections. Reconnected the battery. We'll give it a start real quick here. So let's take it out of gear. Nice and tight. This is the UUC short shift kit. Starts up. Let's try reverse. Yeah, that moves. You can see here. Yeah, works great. Clutch is still a little soft. A lot of times they need a lot of pumping to get them up to full pressure. I'm gonna have to put my BMW code back in. That's in the book. That's somewhere in here. They come in your owner's manual. Radio is terrible in this anyway, so not the end of the world. There we go. Fully done.